Hello and welcome back to Rehydrate. This season, we'll be reading and discussing Liu Cixin's Das End, the third and final part of the Remembrance of Earth's Past series. This is Season 5, Episode 6, Singer, covering Part 5. We've previously talked about the three-eyed problem and the Dark Forest, and the hosts have varying levels of knowledge on this book and the series. My name is Dan, and I've read the entire series.
This is Tim, and I've only read up to the current week's reading.
And this is Amin, and I've only read up to the current week's reading. And along with Dan and Talia, I also co-host the Rehydrate spoiler cast, where people who've read the entire series spoil what's going to come for us. And you should check that out if you read the entire series or you just don't care about spoilers.
And this week, we also have a special guest host, Frank, who has her person who's often emails with feedback. And he's also been a host or a guest on the interview series. So we're really happy to have you here, Frank.
Thanks, Dan. So I am just a university student studying mathematics, and I've read the whole trilogy several times and in both languages, so Chinese and English. Really glad to join you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Okay, well, let's just jump right into the summary for this episode. So somewhere in the Orion Arm of the Milky Way galaxy, an alien worker named Singer is tasked with determining the sincerity of coordinates and cleansing them. Singer notices a series of interesting communications between two worlds, one of which has already been cleansed, and Singer theorizes that it's because of the nearby slow fog. Singer takes an interest in that world and that originally sent the message, even giving them a nickname of the Star Pluckers. There isn't much time for investigation, as cleansing is just a routine task. Singer is about to use a mass dot to cleanse it when it's noticed that the system has blind corners, and instead decides to use a 2-vector foil instead, as Singer flicks it and continues on singing. Cheng Xin and AA awake from hibernation only 60 years later and are greeted by Xiaobin over a video call. Since they had asked to be awoken only in the event of a dark forest strike, they ask when the photoid is expected to hit the sun, but Xiaobin tells them that the means of the attack is instead a slip of paper. A year previous, workers aboard an advanced warning station noticed an object traveling towards the solar system. They moved to intercept it when they noticed that it had slowed down and observed that it is about the size of a credit card with no mass, perfectly flat, and emitting gravitational waves. They noticed that it seems to not interact with the world at all, as it easily passes through ships and even through people. It is not until the gravitational waves stop that they realize the sinister nature of it, as everything around it starts falling into the object and becomes two-dimensionalized, the same fate that will become the entire solar system. With the knowledge that escape from the dimensional strike is impossible without the proper velocity of light speed, Cheng Xin and AA take a mission to visit Luoji, who's currently on Pluto as a caretaker of Earth Civilization Museum, a repository of all the previous artifacts on Earth, a project conceived by UN Secretary Say centuries ago. When they arrive, they see giant letters carved into the rock that say Earth Civilization. They meet Luoji and tell him that they are tasked with taking the artifacts and distributing them throughout space, in the hopes that they might be recoverable by some civilization millions of years into the future after everything has been two-dimensionalized. As they start gathering the artifacts, they see the solar system start to be two-dimensionalized. First Neptune and Saturn, followed by Earth, Mercury, the Sun, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. Each one turned into an enormous 1x1 scale painting of the body, with each part laid flat, looking like a series of concentric circles. As they start to make their final run, Luoji says he wants to stay back on Pluto. Aboard Halo, Cheng Xin and AA ask him if they can keep Starry Night with him, and Luoji tells them the incredible news that not only did he help with the lightspeed research and that continued after the events that had caused it to get shut down, but one of the curvature propulsion drives they had made was installed on Halo, and they would be the only two people to escape the two-dimensionalization. Shocked at the revelation and ordered not to come back for Luoji, they try to think of a destination in the vastness of the universe. Cheng Xin decides to keep her date that she had made with Qingming and sets the course for DX39 or R star. We have a lot of stuff to cover. So the first thing I wanted to do, because I actually wasn't sure about this myself, the chapter opens with somewhere in the vicinity of the Orion Arm. And just for reference for everybody, I looked up what the definition of the Orion Arm is. And according to Wikipedia, it says the Orion Arm is a minor spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy that is 3,500 light years, or 1,100 parsecs across, and approximately 10,000 light years, or 3,100 parsecs in length, containing the solar system, including Earth. So Singer and his people who are doing their work are currently somewhere in the vicinity of the solar system. And I think they have mentioned it later that at the monitoring station, they see like the Lightspeed trails. So we don't really have a good knowledge of like how they travel, but presumably it's with some kind of Lightspeed. The Singer chapter obviously is a fan favorite among a lot of people, including Frank, and that's why you wanted to be on this episode in particular. And I think a lot of the interesting part comes from just like the same way that we had the different change in perspectives from the Tristellarians and the first book. I think a lot of the interest comes from there, but there's also a lot of kind of lore that happens in that chapter. So Frank, I know you had a lot of notes you want to start talking about, so I'll hand off to you, to open up the discussion there.
Sure, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why this chapter is so attractive is because it actually clears up a lot of the plot points that happened so far in this trilogy, the same way that the Tristellarius chapter in the first book suddenly makes a lot of the things clear because you suddenly get a different perspective and you see much more details. So what this chapter does, it actually summarizes everything from the beginning of the first book until this point. That does it in a way that it uses different terminology, different vocabulary, and in a very dispassionate tone, while making human endeavors and human history all the more insignificant compared to the cosmic picture. Structurally, it summarizes everything before, and then it's also a starting point for everything that is going to happen for the remainder of this book. And I wonder, if everybody feels the same way about this chapter.
Yeah, I really liked this part. I kind of like how he just went into it and trusted the reader to kind of like follow along and like realize what was happening here, and that you're seeing this from the perspective of what just seems to me to be like a drudge worker, an office drone for some extraordinarily higher level civilization or race of beings. And what their purpose exactly is, I guess is to maintain order in the universe at some point. I know that's to some degree, I know that's very vague, but the way he just basically flicks something, that just snuffs out humanity,
right,
so dispassionately. Like, this is a strange like analogy, but do you remember the very end of the movie Men in Black, where I think it's like it like zooms out and I think it was Men in Black, where it kind of like zooms out and shows that like, oh, this entire universe is just like some like little like a ball or sphere, like being.
It was like a cat toy or something, right? It was right on the collar.
Yeah, this is almost what it reminded me of. That everything we care about is just there's a race of beings out there whose concerns are so alien to ours and so concerned with macro scale that everything that we know and everything that we care about is just a speck of dust to them.
I thought that what was interesting about this was the contrast in the bureaucracy between how it was done. So we spent 2.5 books on Earth with all these politicians and committees and everything else trying to decide what to do, and here there's just one guy who's basically on his way to a lunch break or something, just basically wiping out a solar system. And he's not checking with anyone. They're not having heated ethical debates about what they should do. So I thought that contrast was really interesting.
Speaking of bureaucracy and how the hierarchy works on this seed, there's an interesting detail near the end where the elder, which is pretty much the boss, so he start to have this conversation with Singer, and he's able to look into Singer's inner thoughts.
Yeah.
So this detail was only brought to my attention by someone else writing a review online, and it was implying a very repressive and oppressive and implied totalitarian society where there is no freedom of thought, so to speak.
Right.
Because presumably this civilization has existed for a long time in the cosmos, and evolution has, as we understand it, has taken its toll. So that was an interesting aspect.
Yeah, and not only that, but like when he like says he goes through those thoughts and he finds like the rumor, and he's like, well, the rumor's not so bad, but presumably like there's other like things that they find in thoughts that are bad. So yeah, it seems like a common occurrence of like the bosses or the elders kind of just like going through people's thoughts to make sure that they're not like dissidents or that kind of thing.
There's kind of a running theme throughout the series. This is, it's somewhat analogous to the Trisolarans, and when we had it seemed like the Trisolarans were very alien to us and had very alien perspectives and very dispassionate perspectives, but we find that there are some, I forget what we referred to him as, but
the precepts.
Yeah, the precepts, and
Yeah.
like the one like agent among the Trisolarans that was that communicated with Luigi, and seemed to be sympathetic to humans and all that. But there seems to be this running theme that like the higher up your civilization is, or the more I guess the more advanced your civilization is, the less prone it is to emotionality and individualism and sort of individual like agency.
Yeah, and the Trisolarans are described as communicating with light, so like their thoughts are transparent because like you can't hide your thoughts that way.
Yeah, and Lu Shishin's framework here seems to and we'll go into it a little later, I suppose, with Cheng Xin, and how he kind of makes like a final kind of like dig at her for her like bad emotional decision making. In Lu Shishin's universe here, it seems like that is a necessary precondition for survival in this universe. Eliminate individual thought and sort of individual like individual senses of maybe compassion or individual idiosyncrasy.
You brought up the concept of advanced. The thing is, what's interesting is that you could argue the technological advancedness of a civilization. We do this in real world pretty often. Or we could evaluate the moral advancedness, or the how advanced a society is as a system, as a social system or political system. We throw this word all the time around. Within this trilogy, it seems to me that advancedness is almost only defined by technological means, and the consequence of this is this dark forest state of the universe, which is quite depressing. And I guess one of the questions that the trilogy tries to answer is how well human society as is survives or deals with, because we don't actually know whether they eventually survive or not, but how human society deals with this kind of universe where only technological progress is progress, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, and that's probably explaining my point a little clearer than I was. But yeah, I mean, humanity's both kind of sense of compassion characterized by Cheng Xin making these decisions for love, and thus dooming humanity through them, as well as humanity's continued panicky state and constant concern for like whether we're doing the ethics of what they're doing, seems to be a weakness on the grander stage.
I guess the question is like, would we want to live in a society like that where people can, rifle through your thoughts and all the thoughts are transparent, where there's no really individuality in the world, where everything is based off of just pure technological advancement? Being in a civilization where, like earlier, I think Tim mentioned, like we could just flick a piece of dust at a solar system, destroy it without even thinking, right? That's the conflict between the two, not camps, but the two ideals of how the civilization is, the way they hold themselves, right? And that's the conflict between Cheng Xin and her representation of humanity versus Singer or the Trisolarans representing the kind of the brutal nature of the dark forest.
Right. Yeah, we hold ourselves to different standards, and those
Right.
those standards seem to be our undoing in a lot of ways.
So another thing I found really fascinating, I mean, like upon the first read of this, was just the same way that when they introduced the Trisolarans, they had kind of like different terminology about how they do things, and so I think this chapter ramped it up even more. So I made like a list of all the different terminologies and kind of go through them. I know Frank, you also had some thoughts on that kind of stuff. So the first thing I think, and just kind of same way we kind of go through the fairy tales. Like it's a little bit more clear, I think, in this one of like what the analogies are, but kind of go through them just to clear up what they might be. So the first one I think is pretty obvious, which is the mass dot, which is the photoid. So he uses that to destroy both. Someone used a mass dot probably to destroy Trustlayers, but someone else used a mass dot to destroy the star that that Luo Ji sent the spell on. And then the interesting one, or one of the more interesting ones to me, was the slow fog, which I'm pretty sure is the analogy to the curvature propulsion trails or the reduced light speed black holes or the black domain. And so the quote that comes in says, the cleansing against the dead 3-world star had appeared 12 time grains ago. So the star pluckers must have realized that their own position had been revealed. The only choice was to shroud themselves in a slow fog so that they would appear to perfectly safe and that no one would bother them. Apparently the dark or the black domain the thing was the real cosmic safety notice that Qingming was trying to convey. And that's also a danger notice, right? The singer said, "Oh, we saw like a slow fog, close to, not that close, but pretty close enough to Trisolaris, and that's why they considered to be dangerous and cleanse them so quickly."
Yeah. So on top of that, you have the communication membranes that kind of goes on inside Singer's head, and we have medium membrane, long membrane, light membrane, and short membrane. Now, you could actually map these things to the concepts that has already occurred in this trilogy, and it is so satisfying to kind of get it. Just from the context, medium membrane is just radio messages that Ye Wenjie used to communicate with Trisolaris in the first place.
Oh, and they also call them primitive membrane.
Yeah, also primitive. Yes. So long membrane, we know, is the gravitational wave message sent from gravity earlier in Death End. So that's gravitational wave. That's long membrane. And then there's light membrane, which has been mentioned in the book, and there has been some confusion on Reddit about what light membrane actually is. So now my take on this is that it's neutrino beams, because Trisolaris has offered to teach humans how to use neutrino beams to communicate at a cosmic scale. And it fits because light here means something is not very heavy, has very little mass. There is a possible place for confusion here because light in English also has the photon meaning the sunlight, that kind of light. To resolve this, all you need to do is you head to the original edition of the book and see what it says in another language, a language where this synonym doesn't exist. So in the original Chinese, it is quite clear that light in this context means low mass, little mass.
Interesting. Yeah, I had assumed that it was like light as light like photoids or photons, and I thought that was maybe like referencing Luo Ji's plan to the snow project where he's going to use the flashing lights. I guess that was my assumption, but yeah, that's interesting that it's actually like mass light.
Yeah, I guess Luo Ji's plan would, technically speaking, be primitive membrane because he effectively uses the flickering of visible light, visible beams of photons.
Yeah.
And visible light, as we know, is electromagnetic in nature, so that would be primitive. It's my assumption. What is short membrane? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I guess you could infer. Because knowing Leo as the amateur physicist he is, and I am even more amateur, but medium membrane, you have electromagnetic, long membrane, gravity, light membrane, neutrino. Now neutrino is associated with radioactive decay, so you could say that short membrane is also associated with radioactive decay because the 4 fundamental forces that physicists define in nature. But that's pure speculation, and there's no need to really get hung up on this stuff.
Yeah, the quote from they don't really go into it that much, but the quote that they have, it says, it was said that even short membrane could be used to convey messages. If true, this would make the communicators akin to gods. Yeah, you have to be a super advanced civilization to be even able to harness that to be able to deliver.
So I took that to mean closer to like an ESP. So like Frank was saying earlier about how they could read Singer's mind. That's what I took as short membrane, that it was something not supernatural, but much beyond anything that humans actually can do today.
Or even understand, right? And this is like Singer can't even understand
Right.
it.
That's actually a good, I haven't thought of that before. It's very good, very interesting.
So the next thing was the description of time and time structures, and we had also had that before with the Trisolarian chapters, where they kind of describe time in a little bit different way. And I know Frank, you had done some research on the meaning of the time structures and the grains of time here.
Yeah, that's just, well, this is just pastime activity because it doesn't really matter. But what you could do is you take the numbers mentioned in this chapter, and then you match it against the timeline of the book. So, for example, Singer says 9 time grains separated Ye Wenjie's third message and Luozi's spell, and 35 time grains separates the explosion of the star that he cursed and the launch of the dual vector foil. So, after some rudimentary calculations, they could even be wrong, but you add up the years, the Earth years, and compare that to the time grain, you get roughly 6 to 7 Earth years per time grain. And then after that, you have 416 structures between Earth and Trisolaris, which is 4.21 light years between us and the closest galaxy to us. So one structural length is about 1/100th of a light year. So this is pure, just, I guess, somewhat meaningless calculation of what their units actually is.
I think it's still super interesting. So the next thing I had was he talks a lot about low entropy beings and high entropy beings, but he doesn't really. I don't see any description of what high entropy beings are. But the quote is that low entropy entities decrease their entropy and increase their order. And he describes humans and Trisolarians as low entropy, and also Singer himself as their race is also low entropy. So I guess anyone have more thoughts on that one? That was a little bit confusing to me. As to what the actual meanings are. I mean, I know what entropy is, but I don't know how that relates to. I guess like low entropy beings would be like there's less chaos, right? So there's more order to the beings, and maybe like high entropy beings are more like a cloud of things rather than like a solidified body or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and this confused me a bit too because throughout this chapter I was trying to divine what their overall this race's overall efforts in snuffing out other civilizations was trying to achieve. So when they described that we're all low described themselves, or at least Singer describes himself as low entropy and humans and Trisolarians as low entropy, that went against my expectation because to be low entropy sounds like less of a threat. And I guess it again goes back to and maybe I need to reread this chapter and all that, but I didn't glean too many details from this chapter as to what this race of beings, what their overall purpose was in basically snuffing out civilizations. What were they trying to achieve, or what were they trying to maintain? Did they just is it just pure dark forest? They just see these civilizations as a threat, therefore we have to snuff them out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he talks about like his survival taking a lot of the energy of their thoughts. Like survival is just like the main thing that they're always thinking about and trying to achieve, and that he even talks about, they call it the law of reversible discovery, which is I think the dark forest. And the quote there is that recall the great law of reversible discovery. If you could see a low entropy world, then that low entropy world could also see you. It was only a matter of time. Thus, waiting for others to complete cleansing was dangerous. I think it's really just, this is like one of the millions of people who are races that are just trying to survive, and the way they do it is to extinguish other potential threats that they can.
I think low entropy we humans, we come up with the laws of thermodynamics, and it states that the entropy of the universe increases as time goes on, and it's not reversible. So what's special about low entropy entities is that although the total entropy of the universe increases, locally the low entropy entities can decrease their entropy, increase their order. I just take low entropy entities to be intelligent life, because things left to their own will become messier and messier, but consciousness or intelligent beings can organize, these things actively. And they also, in this chapter, they also have intuition, which is something that Singer cannot fully explain. It's not fully replaceable by AI, by the main core, right? Now, this is actually quite funny because the classification of sincere and unsincere coordinates as described in this chapter sounds like a fairly standard problem in today's machine learning world.
Yeah.
Just it's 1 or 0 classification and you have all these features. I guess when this book was written, machine learning didn't take off as it did in recent years, and or Liu is subtly placing his opinion against the AI theory, and he thinks that there's part of the mind that cannot be replicated by computers. As for, the purpose of Singer's race, I think it's almost like their purpose is to survive, and that's it. It's like saying the meaning of life is to live, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's saying that the low entropy entities decrease their entropy and increase their order. This was meaning, the highest meaning, higher than enjoyment. To maintain this meaning, low entropy entities had to continue to exist. So to exist and increase order is the highest meaning to singers, to Singer anyway. Probably not for humans, but for Singer. They cleanse other civilizations so that they have a better chance in the super long term to exist in the cosmos, because they reduce threat to their own civilization. So that's how I read it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, and he talks a lot about like the hiding and cleansing gene, and it seems like that's like the nature of the dark forest. Like there's like 2 outcomes that for any civilization that's going to survive is like one is going to cleanse, which is what Singer's race does, and the other one's going to hide if they develop the technology to put the black domain around their world or wherever they happen to live. Some other terms that I caught. He talks the one there's thing was like tomb. Another mention of tomb. There's been a couple mentions of that throughout the series, both with the ring and then also as a tomb island in the fairy tales. So it said the next task was to put this now useless set of coordinates into the data bank called the tomb. This is also required by established procedure. So I don't know if this was what Qingming was referencing directly. It's just interesting that is another mention of tomb. And maybe Frank, is the word tomb the same for all 3 meanings here, or is it different in the original Chinese?
Tomb means, I do remember. It's just grave, so it's the literal meaning.
Okay, so it's the same like for all 3 instances, like for both the fairy tales, the ring, and this tomb here.
Yeah, so the ring is grave, so no confusion there.
Yeah.
I don't remember where Yun Tianming uses that word though.
For Tomb Island, in the fairy tales, where Prince Deepwater was.
Right. Oh yeah, I think it's the same meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, and then another couple quick ones. So I think the star pluckers is obviously the Earth people, because like Wenjie uses the star to send the message. I think that was just like a cool nickname for us. Like we're important enough where we actually got a nickname, so that's interesting. They have the big eye, which I think is just a really advanced telescope, and finally the dual vector foil, which is obviously the 2D attack that we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah, just to add on, sorry,
Sure.
I was able to check the original edition. It's the same.
Okay.
So it's the same across all 3 instances.
Okay, interesting. One final thing I wanted to talk about around the Singer chapter. I mean, it's only a fairly short chapter in this section, but there's so much lore and so much, just kind of interesting material there. But one of the things that is, I think, the most interesting was this quote here. And this is when Singer had his thoughts kind of probed through and knows and they talk about the war that's happening between them and the other world. And they said, has the home world decided to transform into 2 dimensions? Singer asked. Of course, the elder already knew the question. The elder did not answer, which was also an answer. If the rumor is true, then this is a great sorrow. Singer couldn't imagine such a life. So it seems like in the cosmos here, or in the millions of civilizations that are out there, another way to protect yourself is to transform your civilization into 2D. And presumably they do this with a way to actually live in 2D. I mean, it seems in the earlier Ring chapters that like the 4D beings that go into 3D die when they do that. And presumably from all the descriptions that happen later, the worlds that get 2-dimensionalized also die. But it seems like there are civilizations out there that can survive in 2D as a means for protection.
Yeah, until this point in the chapter, I wasn't sure whether we were dealing with whether Singer's race, whether we're dealing with a race or a civilization that was kind of also subject to the pressures of the dark forest, and also, maybe on equal or lesser footing with other races, or if we were like reading about a race that, like a super race that was basically treating the Milky Way itself as like a garden it had to maintain, which, or something, and we're responsible for like all of the dark forest strikes, which is why I initially kind of had questions about what their purpose was. But this part, kind of clarifies it that, they too are, they're not a like master rate, civilization in the Milky Way, but that, they too are under threat.
One thing that stood out to me is, despite how dispassionate this chapter is, the name Singer has an almost romantic connotation to it.
Yeah.
And he sings classic songs.
Right.
It's almost like he still values a bit of joy, and he is forced to adopt this brutal Black Forest state.
Yeah, I think that's
right?
true. Yeah, because especially like when he wants to like investigate the world further just to kind of see how it is, and the elder's like, no, just continue with your work.
Yeah, so he's oppressed as well, and almost forced to be in this kind of position.
Yeah, it seems like personal individuality, kind of going back to our discussion a little earlier, still exists in all of these races. Trisolarans to maybe a greater degree than Singer's race, and Singer's race maybe to even lesser degree, but it's still there, as if it's almost a vestigial, like, remnant of their evolution, and that they probably also went through a phase that humans are going through, where they haven't quite learned to be as dispassionate, and that ethics beyond pure survival still guide humanity as on a macro level, where like once you've reached the point of Singer's race, it's only like pure like introspection, or your kind of your own private thoughts to the degree that you have them. That's the only like avenue for those sort of personality quirks to exist in.
Yeah, I wonder if like that's part of the reason that they are that going through people's thoughts is like just a common thing. Like, Singer doesn't seem to even think he just knows it's going to happen and accepts it. Thinking about it kind of reminds me of the Borg from Star Trek, where they introduce like a one Borg who has like individual thoughts, and it kind of destroys the or it has the potential for destroying the collective. And the Borg are also able to read everyone else's thoughts because they're just one big collective. And so maybe that's the society there that you need in order to survive a dark forest state. And that's why they are able to and do go through people's thoughts. Okay, well, let's move on to the next part here. And there's basically 3 big parts of this section. So we have Singer part, and we have the introduction of the 2-vector, the dimensional attack, and then the escape in the museum. So let's talk about the dimensional attack. That's also, I think, a very grand piece of this book and this series. Another thing that's gonna be almost impossible to film, but we'll see. The first thing I found was just the just kind of more funny is that just humans are just stupid, like when they encounter the foil, they're like they put it to the ship and they mess with it. It sort of reminded me of the hammer when he like tries to hammer the droplet back last book, and now they're like have this foil in front of them. They don't know what to do with it, so like they let it like go through objects, and even like they said like one let's some guy lets it go through his brain, and the quote is then they touch it casually, allowing it to pass through their bodies. Some even let the plane pass through his eyes and brain, asking his friend to take a picture of the sight. It reminds me of just like stupid humans on Instagram or whatever trying to take pictures of some extremely dangerous thing, but it's just funny. So I guess like I just want to open up the floor to discussion around the dimensional attack in general. I thought like some of the descriptions were, some of the best of the series, just kind of artistically describing how this would happen. And obviously it's like such a grand set piece and a very memorable part of the series. So yeah, as first time readers, maybe let's open it up to Amin and Tim to get your thoughts on it.
I thought this was, so being on the spoiler cast, I knew this was coming, and I thought it was interesting the way it was done in terms of the way they made it so it could be observed happening across the solar system. So rather than it just being something that's instantaneous, the people on Pluto, they could kind of see the other planets being flattened, and I thought that was an interesting way to do it rather than it just being something that happens automatically. I don't know if we'll talk about this later, but I thought that their ship having a secret Lightspeed function that seemed a little hokey, a little convenient. Again, I knew that was coming, but just the way it turned out was strange. And then I don't know if this is the right time, but I also want to talk about why Luoji wouldn't go with them on the ship, but that we can wait on that.
Yeah, let's talk about that next. But yeah, I want to make sure we cover this section first. Yeah, I think the description of like it's slowly happening across the solar system was, and then there's also like point of view perspectives as well, like the perspectives on the actual space city of like they had the football shaped space city where like the plane was actually like coming towards it, and everyone's just kind of slowly falling towards it. I thought that was very very descriptive, and it like really painted painted a picture to of how that actually happened.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about in this series how the story is often a vehicle for Lu Shixin to just kind of put on display all of the cool like scientific concepts that he could think of, and it all seems to be kind of building to this grand finale here. And yeah, I'll agree with Amin's some of the circumstances that led to like Cheng Xin and A to like be there to like observe this is a little contrived. I think like why were they chosen to, but it's just kind of they're the main characters, so that's why we get this all from their perspective. But yeah, I thought it was very cool and very difficult to visual. Like he does about as good a job as you can trying to give the reader an idea of what this looks like. As far as how he goes on to describe how like for example, like when a human gets essentially two-dimensionalized, or any other object with a discernible structure, how you could still somehow like determine those structures, or like see those structures, like you'd see something still human shaped, a 2D image still human shaped, didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, given how he like describes how like every basically atom is basically on display and laid out. So like why would any semblance of its former shape or structure, 3D structure, be like, I had a hard time understanding why there would be even anything recognizable there. I think it would just be like a big smear,
Right. I think that's fair. But
yeah, I think he's taking some artistic license here. Obviously you can't render this like completely realistically because it's still, I don't think any human could,
right.
So I think he's got some artistic license here to make it look cool more than he would make it look realistic, whatever realistic is. But yeah, it is like I was not expecting the at the start of this series or in the middle of this series to watch the solar system be destroyed. And this was a pretty cool way to do it.
Did you think it was going to be another fake out?
Possibly.
Yeah.
And at the end, in a way, there is a tiny bit of a fake out with these, the ship having, light speed capability. And
when I first read it, I was like, there's no way he's going to collapse the entire solar system into 2 dimensions. But nope,
right.
He did it. How about you, Frank? When you first read this, what were your thoughts? And then I guess on subsequent reads, like, have you gleaned any more knowledge out of it, or what are your thoughts on this part?
My initial emotional response was sadness, mostly. It seems at this point that there's not gonna be a good ending to this trilogy, and it's gonna be a tragedy. But on subsequent reads, I was more focused on the artistic description of how everything is turned into 2 dimensions. And eventually I was able to kind of focus on the technical aspect of it, because the problem of turning 3D space into 2D is fairly straightforward in mathematics, because in math you have the space of R3 and R2, and we know that the cardinality, the size of the space, the number of points in these spaces, they're equal. They're infinity, but they're equal infinities. So it is possible to establish a point-to-point mapping between the 2 spaces. Now, this is all abstract, but I was deeply impressed when a friend of mine a while ago sent me this link on Chinese internet, and someone actually wrote a script to attempt to visualize this on the web, on HTML. So he basically built a skeleton website to visualize how this would work.
Oh.
And I was quite impressed, because he used this thing called Hilbert curve, which is essentially a way of mapping a higher dimensional space into a lower one by iteratively defining a series of curves that eventually goes through every single point of the original space. And then he was able to kind of, first of all, convert the Earth into voxels, which is the 3D equivalent of pixels. So it's like Minecraft, right? So you kind of reduce the 3D space into little cubes, and then run these cubes through a certain iteration of the Hilbert curve, and then rearrange these cubes onto 2D in a specific way. And the end result was, just like Tim said, it's not quite the way the book described it. It's kind of like a messy, all laid out side by side, but it's not really recognizable from the 3D form. So yeah, I mean, Tim's right. The author here took some artistic license, and he actually even said that modern image processing software could establish this mapping and possibly reverse the 2D mapping back into 3D form.
Yeah.
But some fan of the work actually went and did this, and it did not work quite the way it was described in the book. Now, it could be that he didn't use a very high resolution, because it's cubes, and in reality it's atoms, which is much smaller than the cubes that he was able to define. But yeah, this whole sequence of 2-dimensionalization was fascinating in I guess an artistic way, but also in a technical way. If you really want to get into the implementation of it on our computer.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. I hadn't seen that either, so I'll have to definitely check that out. That's awesome. I'd be interested to see what that actually looks like. And maybe the show producers are also using it to think about how they're going to implement that when it actually comes down to it. I can see them doing it in an animation style, but if they're actually going to try to visualize it in like a quote unquote realistic style, like that's going to be pretty tough to do in a convincing way.
Well, the thing is, they don't have to visualize it. Well, they can also take artistic license on the screen, right? They could. Yeah. So no, nobody is going to bother actually diving into the math.
So when things are turning into 2 dimensions, was it only the planets and the asteroids and the sun that were being flattened, or what about the space around that? I guess, was that also... Because to me, it seemed like space stayed the same, but the planets themselves, what was being flattened? Was I reading that correctly, or is there something else going on there?
I took it as everything, even space was being flattened, but like they couldn't see it because there's no like energy that's released, I guess, when it's flattened, the same way that when the sun or anything like that has, because we don't really know what space is, right? Or I don't. Um, but it just doesn't release like light energy the same way. But like the planets were still far apart from each other the same way they are far apart in 3D. I was presuming that all space was, yeah, space and matter in that space was two-dimensionalized. I could be misunderstanding it, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think to me, and I totally could be wrong on this, but to me, vacuum in 3D is still fundamentally different from vacuum in 2D. Yeah, so that's how I took it. So yeah, even vacuum space would be turned into 2 dimensions.
Okay.
Anything else that we wanted to discuss around the two-dimensionalization?
Not about the 2-dimensionalization itself, but there was an interesting point when the crew on that ship was recalling a dream, a conversation he had with Ding Yi.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace. But so by ice, he's Ding Yi's student, and they were having this discussion in the desert about why is it that physicists try to understand the world through a loss of nature that doesn't actually account for life. So this is a pretty fundamental problem, even philosophically, because we scientists, they know that cells, the basic unit of life, is made of atoms and chemical compounds, extremely complex chemical compounds that is governed by laws of physics. But then biologists and physicists, they're concerned with completely different matters, and I think they use pretty different methodologies to explain reality. And physicists have wondered, is there something fundamentally different with life that physics cannot explain? So I guess Liu must have read about this somewhere, sometime, and he decided to incorporate this into By Ice's dream with Ding Yi. So I cannot answer the question because many other great thinkers have thought about this. But this kind of philosophical question, they pop up throughout this entire trilogy, and it's one of the great joys of rereading this trilogy is to notice how these questions, they get raised, defined, and somewhat answered at some places. And it's the maximalist nature of this work in that some details in this book is worth of writing a whole other book on its own.
I think there's a lot of those. Yeah, there's a lot of like sections like that could warrant their own like spin-off series that would be just as interesting as the series.
Yeah, and also like you could, I guess a physicist could write a book about what is life question of biology and physics.
Yeah, I totally agree that like on subsequent readings of the book and the series, like it's enhanced by having that the knowledge of what happens in the rest of the series and like more critically studying it and looking for these connections. And so yeah, I mean, for people who are really into the series, I definitely recommend going through and reading it and critically looking for these kind of things. So I actually had a question for Tim and Amin. We have a lot of more context around the kind of the meanings of the fairy tales now, like they mentioned in the book, like the painting, putting people in the paintings and the fairy tales is like actually like very literal here. And that was like probably the most literal part of the fairy tales where it was not clear at the time. But does this section like kind of clear up more things, and does it want to make you go back and read the fairy tales again to see if you can pick up more clues out of it?
Well, for me, I think, getting to be on the spoiler cast, especially the one where we talked about this, I think we dove really deeply into a lot of what the fairy tales could mean. So for me, I didn't feel like I needed to go back and read anything or I learned anything new. Although I think that's because I'm on the spoiler cast. Otherwise, I think I might have gone back and tried touching on some things.
Yeah, I think it's almost by design that the I kind of realized at the time that while reading them, that this was going to be a cipher for the rest of the book in some way. I think that's why he spends so much time with them and put so much effort into them. So I think the author almost expects you to go back and reread them. So yeah, I mean it would be something on a reread that I would pay closer attention to, and it would probably be easier to do so given that you're going in armed with all of this knowledge, and you could make these connections and understand these metaphors a bit more. But yeah, I mean it would be an interesting part to reread. I'm not sure if I would like immediately go back and reread them. I'd probably wait for a reread of the series to kind of maybe actually even maybe let some of the like details fade a bit, and then see like on like after a couple of years, and then like see rereading that section whether they like how they would read a second time after maybe like not having the book fresh in your memory and letting some details fade a bit, and then see how that reads again.
I had a tangential question, I guess, for Frank in this part. So when Ding Yi they were talking about the sand falling and they were trying to escape it, he described it as looking like Niagara Falls. And I was wondering, is Niagara Falls that globally famous, or was that something they did for the translation to help American audiences make sense of what he was talking about there?
I'm quite sure it was also Niagara Falls in the original.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, I actually remember being taught in elementary school in China that the Niagara Falls was the largest waterfall in the world in terms of volume. So I guess, he expects the Chinese reader at least to know what Niagara Falls is.
I think they have that. Yeah, they have that unique, horseshoe shape too. So I think there's probably not a lot of other analogs in the world for that. So it's probably still maybe the best natural natural phenomenon that kind of matches what he's trying to describe.
Yeah, and well, I guess for me, I know like 4 waterfalls in the world, so I'm just surprised
Right.
Niagara Falls makes the top 4 for some people.
I mean, I suppose, and again, yeah, this is just from an American context, but, it's hard to name too many other like famous waterfalls. Like, I mean, I know of Niagara Falls because its proximity and because it's supposed to, be the most, by volume, the largest waterfall. And then I know of Angel Falls in Venezuela, which is the highest one, I think, but yeah, I don't know too many waterfalls aside from that.
Yeah, I was going to say, me and you know 4. That's 3 more than I do.
Yeah, it is Niagara Falls in the original, and I guess okay, I think the gist of this part of the plot is quite clear, even if the reader doesn't know where or what Niagara is. Like, it's a waterfall, right?
Yeah, I think he did a good job of describing what was happening. I was just surprised that Niagara Falls is what came to the Chinese author's mind, but I guess Niagara Falls is more famous than I realized.
Well, definitely in Canada, so
yeah,
for obvious reasons. But Liu is well traveled, I think. From his interview series, he seems to, especially about North America, he seems to have a pretty good knowledge of the trivia concerning the U.S. and Canada. So
yeah, and whirlpools in Norway as well.
Yeah, that's also true.
Yep.
So while we're on this point, section with Ding Yi, in the stream sequence with him, his like parting word at words as they're like falling into the whirlpool, or sorry, not whirlpool, waterfall of sand, is there's no table untouched at the dinner party, and there's no virgin untouched in the universe. Waha, he, he's kind of going nuts. His brain is breaking as a physicist. It's it feels like in this depiction of him. And is that like that table untouched the dinner party, or virgin untouched in the universe, is that basically him like realizing that the laws of physics, like as you said, the field physics is kind of this search for these fundamental laws of the universe. Is it him coming to the realization that those laws might not be so fundamental or might be fungible by other beings? Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I took it as. Like, oh, like what's the point of physics if like physics can be changed and that it is not a like essentially the universe might and its laws might not be a virgin landscape touched like untouched by other beings, but those laws have been like changed by other beings or higher. So yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
so if we're trying to understand those laws that have been like affected by other beings or changed by them, like what's the point if that might change, or the actual fundamental laws of the universe might be something that like exists like a layer above, like a whole a layer of extra dimensional beings that we would have to like
Yeah.
understand first before we even understand what governs them.
So this is going to be an unsatisfying answer, but I would hold off to talking more about that until next episode. It's a really good. It's a really good point and really good catch.
Okay.
But there's yeah, let's wait until next episode to talk more about it.
Sure.
Which is our final episode, and I think it'll give you a good explanation. The thing I will say in context of this chapter is that right after that dream, he realizes the two-dimensional state, and like tells him like get away as soon as possible. Even though it's he later realizes it's futile because of the escape velocity needed, is light speed, and I think he understands like in his mind that physics is not what they thought it was, and Dinghy is kind of the representation in his mind of that. So that's my take on it, but it's explored a lot more in the next chapter,
Sure.
and to not spoil anything.
Of course.
All right, well, let's move on to the last part of this episode, which is all the events that happen on Pluto, and then also the realization that that the Lightspeed research has continued, and the Cheng Xin and NAA have a Lightspeed ship in their possession. And so, Frank, I know you put in your notes around some of the things around Luigi's send-off here and how you really appreciated it.
Yeah, it's in a respectful way. For a 200-year-old legend
Yeah.
in the series, I'm totally fine with how things ended for him. So yeah, not much to add there.
And I thought like the little detail about him holding onto the Mona Lisa, kind of that was a good callback there. His him, and it talked a lot about how like his mind changed over the literal centuries of him being a wall facer to a sword holder to whatever he was towards the end there. But yeah, like he turns into a very impressive character, but then he also like remembers those times literally hundreds of years ago with Zhang Yan in the Louvre, looking at the Mona Lisa. How about you and how about Tim and Amin? What do you guys think of Luigi's send off here?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I mean, it felt like a tiny bit cliched, but not necessarily in a bad way. In that you kind of have this, yeah, like why isn't it seems to happen in a lot of more fantasy stories than sci-fi stories, but yeah, where you have this like kind of like wizened figure that's kind of explains everything at the end, and obviously he doesn't explain everything, but yeah, I mean, I think he's here to kind of provide that like connection to the remainder of the earlier parts of the series. Yeah, I thought it was a good use of his character and a good send off, like you know why he was chosen. There's still this kind of odd through line with how these major characters get to be these major characters through frankly kind of bizarre program, like the wall facer program, the sword holder program. It's kind of, they're kind of strange, contrived, maybe the most unrealistic part of how humanity behaves in a series that is pretty good about like representing how humanity would behave and react to these large crises in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, there's always been these plot points that have sort of created these great men, great figure, like basically created the characters that we that are basically window into this story. But yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good send off for his character, and it seems like how he got to 200 years. I mean, who knows? And I don't know if it ever went into like where he like has he been on this, you know, because the last time we saw him, he was already 120 years old. Has he been on here for 80 years, or just kind of?
Well, they talked about how he was part of the team that did
Okay,
the research into Lightspeed. After the events of Halo, he was part of that team.
right.
And it seemed like there's a lot more people on Pluto originally, but then by the time Cheng Xin and AA got there, they said,
Yeah,
"Oh, all those guys left. They're trying to get out because they're dumb."
I imagine he's pretty tired at this point. So like
Yeah,
him, just kind of not sacrificing himself, but just letting 2D take him, even though he
right.
had the option to leave, seems fitting for his character.
Hmm.
Low gravity makes you live longer. That was my theory.
Hmm.
But why didn't he go with them on the ship? Why? What was his heroic action that he wanted to stay behind?
I don't think it was heroic. Again, I think he was just tired.
Yeah,
He's just too old. He's just
his
like,
time.
this is my time. Maybe he was curious as to what it might. There was,
Yeah, I mean,
something
and he,
beyond 2D. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, he knows that that there's other people out there. He talks about how the gravity sent the gravitational waves to the bunker world a couple years ago. So he's hoping that they can that the race can still continue if they're able to meet up with them at some point. And he also says like, "Oh, I wouldn't live long anyway if I was on that ship." So I think he like Tim said, he's tired. He knows it's his time, um, and it's a pretty interesting way to go out, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I think like the whole premise of the Pluto museum is also interesting, and how they carve the big words into stone, and like the Chinese characters are like city sized. They say air civilization, how they land on that. There's also another interesting 2001 reference here about the black monolith that is the entrance to the museum. The black monolith was the only protrusion above the white ground. It gave off an eerie sense of simplicity, as though it was an abstraction of the real world. This looks a bit familiar, Cheng Xin said. So I think that's another nod there to 2001.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, the black monolith is a
Right.
pretty loaded term. So and I thought the other part was the other artistic work that is described here is about Starry Sky. And I hadn't ever seen anybody talk about string theory versus Starry Sky before, but Chung Xin's quote here is that Van Gogh's representation of space had left a deep impression on her. In his subconscious, space seemed to have structure. Chung Xin wasn't an expert in theoretical physics back then, but she knew that according to string theory, space, like material objects, was made of many microscopic vibrating strings. Van Gogh had painted these strings in his painting. Space, like mountains, wheat fields, houses, and trees, was filled with minute vibrations. So, yeah, I don't know that any other author would have equated string theory to Van Gogh's Starry Night, but I think that was a good detail there. And I think Starry Night's like another good. I think the analogy of like what the 2D painting would, the 2D-ification of the universe would look like. I think that was an interesting comparison there.
Yeah, I thought it was a little cliched at first because Starry Night is often cited as like this is the painting that like every college dorm room had Starry Night on it. So the choice of like you know Starry Night and the Mona Lisa as like these representatives, like relics of Earth civilization, has felt a little cliched to me, but he gives a good justification for using Starry Night, I think.
Yeah, and he also mentions again the Chinese painting, the Qingming festival, along the river at the Qingming festival. And so I know that's and Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's as famous as those two paintings in China.
Yeah, probably the most famous classical paintings out there.
Yeah, and Talia mentioned this in the spoiler cast the other day, or the last episode. But that painting is they said only like 24 centimeters high, and it's like meters long, right? So I think that's really interesting because like if you look at the painting on Wikipedia or whatever, like online, it seems like just crazy detail and this goes on forever.
Right.
Um, and yeah, the fact that it's only like 10 to 20 centimeters high, it's just nuts.
Well, yeah, the thing the way classical paintings work is that it's supposed to be rolled, and then when you want to, so when it's stored, it's like a roll tucked away somewhere. But when you want to look at it, you would have two people hold up the roll, and you would unroll it slowly. And then as the painting is unrolled, the person who wants to look at the painting, usually somebody pretty high up, like the emperor, he would just walk along, and as the painting is unrolled, and the painting tells a story almost from left to right as it is unrolled. And when you're finished, you just roll it up and tuck it away again. So that's why it's very long, but not necessarily very wide. I think this whole Pluto section, the thing that struck me most is, again, how insignificant the human history is, and how short it is. And we've seen this before when in the final 10 minutes of Cheng Xin's career as a sword holder, because we had a pretty long description of how somehow the entire Earth history was coming to an end when the droplet was attacking the gravitational wave antenna. So back then it was like, okay, after Earth was formed as a planet, we had billions of no life, and then the dinosaurs arrived. They survived for a few billion years, and then they went away, and then some more geological ages after humans appeared, and they have only survived 5,000 years, give or take, which is like a decimal point compared to the dinosaurs.
Right.
So then, okay, so we see, so this was Cheng Xin's final 10 minutes as a sword holder, and then we get the same kind of feeling here in this chapter. And I think the most representative is saying that the skulls of the Neanderthals compared to modern humans, now to us, there is a tremendous difference between the two skulls. But then by the time somebody else discovers this tomb, the Neanderthals and modern humans, because they're only a couple thousand years apart, they would appear to be the same species. And I think that just speaks to the power of time at a cosmic scale, and just how fast how short human civilization is compared to this universe.
Yeah, the Neanderthal skull also stuck out to me as a very good representation of like just how insignificant, and not insignificant, but like how short. I guess insignificant in the cosmic scale of things. Like humans are like don't even register because like our time has been so short.
Yeah, and it's not it's not a an original point, but this section in this series kind of drives it home. That's why like exploring space or space exploration, or just like understanding what the enormity of space, why it's so kind of scary to us in a lot of ways, because as in our short evolution, we've in our short time on Earth, we've developed religion, we've developed our own like the human id, and the human like the human kind of arrogance that we think we're special in some way, or at least we want to think we're special in some way, or that like the universe, like even if you don't, like I think there's a human tendency, even if you're not like religious in the traditional sense, and you believe in a god as conceived by humans, that you we still don't, we're still really uneasy with the idea, that space or the universe is completely like indifferent to our continued survival or existence.
Yeah.
And that I think we want to believe, even in our conceptions of like other aliens, that we obviously ascribe human characteristics to them, or anthropomorphize them in some way, or want to think that they have human ethics or concerns, that we want to think that the universe or whatever is out there, intelligent life is out there in the universe, like is interested in us and endorses our survival or wants to see us thrive, as in some way, as opposed to just seeing us as a speck of or just something that is that should be wiped out. And again, that's not an original, that's a theme that's in a lot of, especially kind of like darker themed sci-fi. But I think this does a pretty exceptionally good job at kind of making the reader kind of come to that realization that we are not special, and that everything we ever known could be wiped out by either natural or unnatural phenomenon in the universe.
Yeah, just some rote job that some guy, some worker in some distant civilization just throws a 2D vector at us.
Right.
Yeah, so the final thing I want to talk a little bit about was the realization of Lightspeed and sort of I think the fact that it's there I think is interesting. And then I think another part that was also interesting was the reaction to people around the ship when they realized that they had Lightspeed, and they even get to the point where like they see that the halo accelerating faster than other ships, and they're like, oh, that ship must have Lightspeed, you should crash into it. Just the last gasp of human selfish reaction to not being able, because like one of the people says, oh, I should be on that ship, that kind of thing. So and that's kind of the reason they did it in secret, right? Is because if they realized that Lightspeed was a thing, then everyone would fight over it and maybe even destroy it. So this is like kind of the last gasp of humans' selfish nature, I think.
Yeah, I thought the comment about crashing into them was really strange, but yeah, I guess that is human nature, that if you can't have it, then nobody should have it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it kind of like there's a theme of escapism throughout the entire series, or I guess like not the entire, like the last two books, right? Of how escapism is so dangerous, and this is sort of just a implementation of that, of why it's so dangerous, because we would have this on a wider scale of people trying to escape, and then like this is another, I talk about the controversies that are part of the series, but this is sort of another thing where the Cheng Xin becomes a controversial character because given the fact that the universe is to be two-dimensionalized, her shutting down Lightspeed research not only kind of hurts the possibility of humanity being able to escape more en masse than just two people, but also shuts down the ability to protect the solar system as a whole by putting a black domain around it, if they were able to get to the point where they said 1,000 ships leaving the sun simultaneously and enveloping the world in a black domain.
Yeah, he's awfully mean. The author is awfully mean to Cheng Xin in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because then, in same thing with the sword holder, incident. Like in the moment, like she seems relatable to me, as a human, and he kind of gets in this final dig at her, like like
Yeah.
your two big decisions have essentially doomed humanity for circumstances that seemed reasonable to me as the reader. And and I don't know if like if this is kind of there's been like some discussion and criticism of him like being kind of sexist with his female characters, and it's I don't know if it's a coincidence that this character who makes these, in hindsight, terrible decisions that and who does them out of love or for very emotional reasons, is his is a female character. And I don't know if and like all of the characters, Lua G, Wade, who kind of seem to possess this hyper rationality, who would have made these decisions that would have saved could have saved humanity, are all male. Like, I don't know if it's maybe his maybe some sexism coming through, or if maybe it's just coincidence and he just wanted to have a female like main character for the final book, and he would have had a male, if you had gone with a male character, would have made the same, that male character might have made the same bad decisions. But given some of the criticism between Louis G's former live interest and the way he's had some female characters in the past, it's a little suspect.
It's definitely a criticism that's levied against him, pretty around the series, I think.
Tim made a really good. Okay. First of all, I would admit that in terms of character, I'm not the biggest fan of Cheng Xin. I prefer Luozi or even Wade. But in this case, I think Tim raised a really good point. Is that in hindsight, we know that she made a bad decision stopping Lightspeed ships. But that's the key, hindsight, because I think we only know how important Lightspeed is when we look back, when we know that there's a connection between this and the black domain. But then how was she supposed to know this when she stopped Wade, when she stopped a potential, I guess, deadly conflict between Wade's people and the Federation? So I don't really blame her for this. There's, she couldn't have known.
Yeah, and it's possible, like, in the course of events, right? Like she was in favor of Lightspeed research. She wanted that to go forward. That's why she even made the decision to give to Wade in the first place.
Yeah.
But she didn't want to have Wade kill millions of people to achieve that goal. So yeah, I think and I think that our point earlier talking about the kind of the divergent nature of humans, kind of more sentimental nature versus the bleak reality of the dark forest is sort of in contrast here with like Cheng Xin versus Wade, right? They're the kind of two personifications of those points of view.
This is also in the context of weighing the different strategies between the Black Domain, Bunker Project, and Lightspeed ships, and that all we've observed and all the information that we're going on at the moment is observing how other dark forest strikes have happened. We've not seen a two-dimensional blah blah flattener. We've just seen these bullets fired at stars that blow them up. So the Bunker Project seemed like it was doable. It seemed like a really good option, at least to me at the time. It's like, wow, this is really inventive. This is, used like, in the context of your pre-existing knowledge of how this, how the dark force strikes work and what your current level of technology is capable of, then it seemed like a good option. So how would you necessarily make a different decision unless you were like really extremely motivated by in order to lean towards Lightspeed ships, that the rest of the universe is our manifest destiny and we need to explore it.
Yeah, and there's also that conflict of escapism too.
I also think it's interesting that I didn't care for the character either. I didn't dislike her, but I think if you swapped her gender, I don't think anything in the story would really change. Or even with Wade, if you swapped Wade's gender, I don't think anything would change either. I think there's very few characters that need to be the way they are. But yeah, I thought the same thing as Frank, that this character wasn't really my favorite, and it was interesting that they chose her to be we haven't gotten to the end of the book yet, but to be the main character of this final book in the trilogy.
They do mention that she's a couple times about her maternal nature, right? Like, caring for the human race as a mother would care for them. So I guess that if they did swap the gender, I think it's also possible to do that and have a more caring, nurturing male person as well. But it would have to change the story a little bit. It wouldn't be just like swapping his to hers.
Yeah, I mean, is there either a conscious or subconscious condemnation of I don't know what you would describe as like more female lines of thought, or by the author here?
Well, I mean, the characteristics of different of male and female. This isn't exactly new. Thinkers in the past have dealt with subjects quite seriously. Some of their ideas may sound pretty outrageous by modern standards, but I recently learned of a book called Sex and Character by an 20th century Austrian philosopher Otto Weiniger. I only know him because he had influence on another tremendously influential 20th century philosopher, and I won't get into details, but he has some pretty outrageous and controversial ideas, to say the least. So, it's possible that this trilogy also wants to, especially the third book, also wants to slightly discuss that subject in a very subtle way. Maybe not so subtle, but discuss the subject. And the readers, I think they have to agree to disagree on some of the points that this third book is implying.
Thank you very much for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes, reading list, pronunciation guides, and all the other stuff we have on there. Please leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter at rehydratepod. So again, thank you very much, Frank, for joining us. Really appreciate your insights and all your comments and suggestions over this series. It's been really great from hearing from you. And thanks for joining us. And please join us next episode for the season finale of this series as season 5, episode 7, Our Star, covering part 6 of Descent by Liu Cixin.